They say the Cumberland River holds secrets. Old fishermen will tell you that if you listen closely enough in the hours before dawn, when the mist rises like ghosts from the water, you can hear the river singing. Not everyone believes this, of course. But Finn did, and that belief would change his life forever. Our story begins on a morning much like any other in Nashville, Tennessee. The year was, well, the year doesn't matter much. Some stories are timeless, existing in a place between memory and dream. What matters is this: there was a boy, a river, and a song that hadn't yet been sung. Finn woke before the sun, as he did every morning. His small cabin creaked in the pre-dawn wind, and through the gaps in the wooden walls he could smell the river. It was a smell he'd known his entire life: wet earth and fish, moss and possibility. His father had been a fisherman, his grandfather before him, and his great-grandfather before that. The river was in Finn's blood, flowing through his veins like ancient music. He dressed quietly, careful not to wake his father, who slept in the next room. The old man's breathing was labored these days, rattling in his chest like stones in a jar. The doctor had said it was the river fever, that disease that took so many who worked the water. They had maybe 6 months, maybe less. After that, Finn would be alone in the world, with nothing but his nets and his songs and the river that had given his family everything and taken so much in return. But these were not thoughts for Dawn. Dawn was for hope. Finn stepped outside into the darkness, his fishing nets slung over his shoulder, his father's old guitar strapped to his back. He always brought the guitar to the river. His father had taught him that fishing and music were the same thing. Both required patience, both required listening, both required you to feel the rhythm of something larger than yourself. The walk to his favorite spot took 20 minutes through the sleeping city. Nashville was different at this hour. The neon signs of Broadway were dark. The honky-tonks were silent. Even the street musicians had gone home. This was the Nashville nobody sang about: quiet, vulnerable, real. Finn loved it most at this hour, when the city seemed to take off its mask and breathe. He reached his spot just as the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky. It was a small dock that jutted out into the river, old and weathered, forgotten by the city planners who built the shining new marina downstream. Finn set down his nets and sat on the edge of the dock, letting his feet dangle over the water. Then he picked up his guitar and began to play. The song had no words. It didn't need them. It was the sound of morning, of hope, of a young man who knew his life was small but felt, in these moments, connected to something infinite. The notes drifted across the water, mixing with the sound of the current, the cry of waking birds, the whisper of wind through the willows that lined the bank. Finn didn't know it, but someone was listening. High above the river, in the tallest tower of the Nashville Palace, Princess Melody stood at her window. She couldn't sleep. She rarely could these days. Her room was beautiful: silk curtains, a 4-poster bed, walls covered in gold records and photographs of her performances. But it felt like a beautiful prison. Tomorrow was her 20th birthday. Tomorrow, her father would announce her engagement to Prince Christopher of Memphis, a union designed to merge 2 powerful musical dynasties. She had met Christopher exactly 3 times. He was polite, handsome, utterly boring. He spoke in rehearsed lines, smiled on cue, and looked at her the way one might look at a valuable painting appreciatively, but without real feeling. This was her future. This was what she'd been born for, and she felt like she was suffocating. That's when she heard it. Faint, distant, almost lost in the wind music. Real music. Not the overproduced, perfectly polished songs she performed on stage, but something raw and honest and alive. It called to something deep inside her, something she thought had died years ago under the weight of duty and expectation. She had to find it. She had to know where it came from. For the first time in her life, Princess Melody made a completely impulsive decision. She stripped off her silk nightgown and pulled on the plainest clothes she could find. A simple dress her maid wore, a worn jacket. She tied her recognizable golden hair back in a simple braid and slipped out of her room. Getting past the guards was easier than she expected. They were used to watching for threats coming in, not princesses sneaking out. She knew the palace's secret passages, the ones used by servants. Within 10 minutes she was outside, breathing free air for the first time in months. Within 20, she was following the sound of that music down to the river. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Melody saw him from a distance, a young man sitting on an old dock, guitar in his lap, completely absorbed in his playing. She approached quietly, not wanting to disturb him, and stood there listening. Up close, the music was even more beautiful. It spoke of longing and belonging, of the ache of wanting something more and the peace of accepting what you have. When the song ended, Finn opened his eyes and saw her standing there. She looked like morning itself, simple, natural, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with jewels or silk. He smiled, that easy smile of someone who had nothing to hide. "Morning," he said. "You're up early." "I heard you playing," Melody said, her voice soft. "It was beautiful." Finn laughed and set down his guitar. "That's kind of you to say. My dad always said I played like a dying cat, but I think he was just trying to keep me humble." He gestured to the dock beside him. "You want to sit? I'm about to cast my nets." Melody had never been invited to just sit before. In her world, everything was formal, choreographed. She sat down carefully, very aware of how strange this all was, how her heart was beating faster than it should. "I'm Finn," he said, picking up his nets. "I'm Mel," she replied, using the nickname only her mother had called her, back when her mother was still alive. "Nice to meet you, Mel. You live around here." "Not far," she said vaguely, watching as he began to cast his nets with practiced, graceful motions. "What are you catching?" "Whatever the river feels like giving. That's the thing about fishing, you can't force it. You put in your work, you respect the water, and you hope she decides to be generous." He glanced at her. "You ever been fishing?" "Never." "Never? Well, that's a shame. There's nothing quite like it. Here." He handed her a section of the net. "Help me cast this side. Just hold it loose and throw when I say." For the next hour, as the sun climbed higher and the city began to wake, Princess Melody learned to fish. She learned the weight of wet nets, the surprise of feeling a fish caught in the mesh, the strange satisfaction of hauling in a catch through honest work. Her hands got dirty, her dress got wet, and she felt more alive than she had in years. Finn talked as they worked, easy and natural, telling her about the river, about his father, about the songs he was trying to write. He didn't ask her questions she couldn't answer. He didn't seem to want anything from her except her company. It was the most honest conversation she'd ever had. When the bells of the city began to chime 9 o'clock, Melody realized with a start how much time had passed. She had to get back before someone discovered her missing. "I have to go," she said reluctantly. Finn nodded, pulling in the last of the nets. "Will you come back?" She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. Tomorrow was her birthday, her engagement announcement. After that, her life would be even more restricted, more controlled. This stolen morning would have to be enough. But when she looked at Finn, at his kind eyes, his genuine smile, the way he seemed so completely comfortable in his own skin, she heard herself say, "Tomorrow, same time." His smile could have lit the whole river. "I'll be here." And so began the most dangerous and beautiful friendship of Princess Melody's life. She came back the next morning, and the morning after that, and the one after that. Each time she slipped out of the palace in the dark hours before dawn, her heart pounding with the thrill of escape, and made her way down to the river where Finn waited. He taught her everything he knew, how to read the water to see where fish would gather by the way the current moved, how to tie knots that would hold under pressure, how to clean a catfish without getting stabbed by its spines, how to skip stones across the water's surface, how to find peace in simple work. And she taught him too, though she had to be careful about what she revealed. She taught him songs from lands he'd never visited, melodies that had been passed down through royal courts for centuries. She taught him about music theory, about how to build a bridge in a song, about the mathematics of harmony. When he asked how she knew so much, she said she'd had good teachers. It wasn't a lie exactly. 3 weeks passed, then 4, then 2 months. Summer turned toward fall, and the leaves along the riverbank began to change color. The mornings grew cooler, and Finn would bring an extra blanket for Mel to wrap around her shoulders. Sometimes they would fish. Sometimes they would just sit and talk. Sometimes Finn would play his guitar and Mel would sing, and their voices would blend together in a way that felt like magic. Finn had never met anyone like her. She was educated, yes, but it wasn't just that. She saw the world differently than anyone he knew. She asked questions nobody else thought to ask. She found wonder in things he took for granted. When he showed her a blue heron hunting in the shallows, she watched it with the intensity of someone seeing a miracle. When he sang her a simple folk song, she closed her eyes and listened like it was a symphony. And slowly, without meaning to, without planning it, he fell completely in love with her. Melody knew she was falling too. She tried to stop it, tried to tell herself this was just a fantasy, a brief escape before her real life began. But every morning when she saw Finn waiting on that dock, his face lighting up at the sight of her, she fell a little deeper. He made her laugh. He challenged her to try things that scared her. He listened when she talked, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. And when he looked at her, he saw Mel, not Princess Melody, not a political asset, not a famous singer, just her. But secrets have a weight to them. They grow heavier the longer you carry them, and Melody's secret was becoming unbearable. One morning in late October, 2.5 months after their first meeting, Melody arrived at the dock to find Finn sitting with his head in his hands. She rushed to him, worried. "What's wrong?" Finn looked up and she saw his eyes were red. "It's my dad. He's getting worse, the doctor says, maybe a few weeks now." Melody sat beside him and took his hand. She didn't say empty words about how it would be okay. She just held his hand and let him grieve. After a long moment, Finn spoke again. "I've been thinking about leaving Nashville after he's gone. There's nothing keeping me here except memories and a river that's getting more polluted every year. I thought maybe I'd go to New Orleans or up to Chicago, try to make a living with my music." He looked at her. "What do you think? Am I crazy?" Melody's heart broke. She wanted to tell him not to go, to stay, to wait for her. But wait for what? In 3 weeks she would be officially engaged. In 6 months married. She had no right to ask him to stay, no right to derail his dreams for a future they could never have. "I think," she said carefully, "that you should follow your heart. You're talented, Finn, really talented. The world should hear your music." "Would you," he hesitated, "would you come with me if I went?" The question hung in the air between them. Melody felt tears burning behind her eyes. This was the moment. She should tell him the truth. Tell him who she really was, why she could never run away with him, why this whole thing had been a beautiful lie from the start. But before she could speak, they heard voices, angry voices coming closer. Checked down by the docks, she was seen heading this way. Melody's blood went cold. The royal guard. Someone must have seen her leaving the palace, must have followed her. She stood quickly, panicked. "Mel, what's wrong?" Finn stood too, confused by her sudden fear. "I have to go right now." "But—" "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She turned to run, but it was too late. 6 royal guards in their distinctive red and gold uniforms came around the corner of the dock, and their captain's voice rang out across the water. "Your Highness, by order of the Music King, you are to return to the palace immediately." Finn stared at Melody, his face draining of color. "Highness." The guards surrounded them. One of them, a young guard who looked apologetic, held out a royal cloak. "Princess Melody, please. Your father is very worried." "Princess?" Finn's voice was barely a whisper. You're the princess, the Music King's daughter." Melody reached for him, desperate. "Finn, please let me explain." But he stepped back as if she'd struck him. The betrayal in his eyes was worse than any words. All this time, all these weeks, you lied to me. I didn't lie about anything that mattered. Everything I told you, everything we shared, that was real. Was it? His voice was cold now, distant. Or was this all just some game? Princess wants to play at being common for a few hours, have a little adventure before going back to her real life. No, Finn, no, it wasn't like that. Your Highness, we must go. The captain's hand was on her arm now, gentle but firm. Your father demands your immediate presence. Melody looked at Finn one last time, tears streaming down her face. I love you, she said. I know you won't believe me now, but I do. I love you. Finn said nothing. He just stood there on the dock, his guitar at his feet, watching as the guards led her away. And in his silence, Melody heard everything she needed to know. The walk back to the palace was the longest of her life. The guards said nothing, their faces carefully neutral. Other people stopped to stare as they passed. A princess being escorted by guards was always news in Nashville. By the time they reached the palace, Melody knew the whole city would be talking about it. Her father was waiting in the throne room. The Music King was a tall man, imposing even without his crown. His face was carved from stone as she entered. Father, she began, but he held up a hand. Not one word, not until I'm finished. His voice echoed through the great hall. Do you have any idea what you've done, the scandal you've created? Your engagement announcement is in 3 days. Prince Christopher's family is already questioning whether this alliance is wise, and you're down at the docks with some fisherman. His name is Finn, Melody said quietly. I don't care what his name is. You are a princess. You have responsibilities, duties. The future of this kingdom depends on your marriage to Christopher. We've been planning this for 2 years. Plans I had no say in. Father, I'm 20 years old and I've never made a single choice about my own life. Because you're not meant to. You're meant to serve something larger than yourself. Like you do, the words came out harder than she intended. Father, when was the last time you actually sang, really sang from your heart? Not for a state dinner or a political alliance, but because you wanted to. The Music King's face went red. How dare you? You used to sing to me when I was little. You and Mother, I remember. You sang songs about the Cumberland River, about fishing at dawn, about the life you had before the crown. Her voice softened. You used to be happy, Father. For a moment, something flickered across the king's face, memory, regret, something almost like pain. But then it was gone, replaced by cold resolve. I grew up, I accepted my duty, and so will you. You are confined to the palace until your engagement ceremony. No more morning walks, no more adventures. He turned away from her. And if that fisherman's son comes near you again, I'll have him arrested for trespassing. Father, please. We're done here, go to your room. Melody fled, not to her room but to the highest tower of the palace, the one place she could be alone. She collapsed by the window that overlooked the river, that river where Finn was probably still standing on the dock, thinking she'd been using him, thinking none of it had been real. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and wept. 3 days passed, then a week. Melody remained locked in the palace, watched constantly. Her engagement ceremony came and went, a cold, formal affair where she and Prince Christopher exchanged promises neither of them meant. He took her hand in front of the court and spoke his rehearsed lines about honor and duty. She smiled her rehearsed smile and played her part. Inside, she was dying. At night, she would stand at her window and look down at the river, searching for any sign of movement on that old dock. But she never saw anyone. Maybe Finn had left Nashville, gone to chase his dreams. Maybe he never wanted to see her again. She wouldn't blame him either way. Down by the river in his small cabin, Finn sat beside his father's bed. The old man was barely conscious now, his breathing shallow and labored. The doctor had stopped coming. There was nothing more to be done. Son, his father whispered, and Finn leaned close to hear. Why so sad? I'm not sad, Dad. I'm right here. You're not alone. Liar, a ghost of a smile. You're thinking about that girl, the one who came to the docks. Finn didn't answer. What could he say? Yes, he thought about her constantly. Yes, he missed her with an ache that felt like physical pain. Yes, he wished he'd never met her because at least then he wouldn't know what he was missing. She lied to you, his father said, about who she was. Yes, but did she lie about how she felt? Finn closed his eyes. He'd been asking himself the same question for days. He remembered every moment with her, every laugh, every shared silence, every time she looked at him like he was the only person in the world. Had all of that been fake? Could anyone be that good of an actress? I don't know, he admitted. I knew your mother for 3 days before I asked her to marry me, his father said, his voice fatting. Everyone said I was crazy, said I didn't know her, but I knew everything that mattered. I knew she was kind. I knew she saw the good in people. I knew, he coughed, a wet, rattling sound. I knew she was brave enough to love someone everyone said she shouldn't, a poor fisherman with nothing to offer. Dad, rest, don't talk. Listen to me. The old man gripped his son's hand with surprising strength. Love doesn't come often, and when it doesn't care about sense or logic or what's proper. If you love her, Finn, if you really love her, then be brave enough to tell her, even if she can't love you back, even if nothing can come of it. Don't let pride steal what could be the best thing in your life. She's a princess, Dad. She's getting married to a prince. What am I supposed to do? Stormed the Palak. His father smiled. If that's what it takes. Then the smile faded and he closed his eyes. I'm tired now. I know, sleep. Your mother's calling me. I can hear her singing. I hear her too, Dad. Sing with me, one last time. And so Finn sang. He sang the old river songs, the ones his father had taught him, the ones his grandfather had taught his father. He sang about the Cumberland, about morning mist and fishing nets, about a life of honest work and simple joy. He sang until his father's breathing stopped, until the hand in his went limp, until he was alone in the world except for a guitar and a river full of memories. He buried his father 3 days later in the small cemetery overlooking the water. The funeral was small, just some other fishermen, a few neighbors, the dock master who'd known his father for 40 years. No princess came. Finn didn't expect her to. She probably didn't even know his father had died. Why would she? They lived in different worlds. After everyone left, Finn stood alone by the fresh grave and made a decision. He would leave Nashville. His father had been right. There was nothing keeping him here now except ghosts. He would pack his few belongings, take his guitar, and head south to New Orleans. Maybe he'd make it as a musician. Maybe he'd end up fishing a different river. Either way, it had to be better than staying here, seeing the palace every day, remembering what he'd lost. But first, he had one thing to do. That night, as the sun set over Nashville, Finn made his way to the palace. The grand Nashville ball was being held, the social event of the season. Finn had heard about it, of course. Everyone had. Prince Christopher and Princess Melody would be formally presented as the future king and queen of the United Kingdoms. There would be music, dancing, celebration. Finn didn't have an invitation. He didn't have fancy clothes. He just had his father's guitar, the last gift the old man had given him, and a song he'd written in the days since they'd parted. The palace gates were guarded, of course, but balls like this were chaotic, caterers coming and going, musicians arriving, staff running back and forth. Finn slipped in with a group of servers, keeping his head down, his guitar case under his arm. Nobody stopped him. Why would they? He was nobody. Inside, the palace was more magnificent than he'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers threw prismatic light across marble floors. The walls were covered in gold records, photographs of the Music King with various famous musicians, paintings of Nashville's glorious history. Everything was beautiful, polished, perfect, and completely, utterly lifeless. He could hear music coming from the great ballroom, some kind of classical piece, technically perfect but emotionally empty. He followed the sound, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. This was insane. He was insane. What was he going to do, just walk into a royal ball and declare his love for the princess? They'd arrest him. They'd throw him in prison. But his father's words echoed in his mind. If you love her, be brave enough to tell her. He reached the ballroom doors. Two guards stood there checking invitations. He'd never make it past them. But then, as if the universe had decided to give him one last chance, a commotion erupted from somewhere inside the ballroom. Shouts, the sound of breaking glass. The guards abandoned their posts and ran inside to investigate. Finn didn't hesitate. He slipped through the doors and into the crowd. The ballroom was massive, filled with hundreds of people in elaborate gowns and expensive suits. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat two thrones. In one was Prince Christopher, looking bored. In the other was Melody. Finn's breath caught. She was wearing a golden dress that caught the light like fire. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style, woven with diamonds. She looked like something from a fairy tale, beautiful, untouchable, impossibly far away. But her eyes looked dead. She was scanning the crowd with a fixed smile, playing her part, and then her gaze passed over him. Stopped. Came back. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and Finn saw everything he needed to see. The smile dropped from her face. Hope, fear, longing, and love flashed across her features in rapid succession. Finn started walking toward the platform. People stared at him, this young man in simple clothes, carrying a guitar case, moving through the crowd with single-minded determination. Guards began to move toward him, but he was faster. He reached the base of the platform and looked up at Melody. "Your Highness," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "My name is Finn. I'm a fisherman's son. I have nothing to offer you. No wealth, no title, no kingdom. I can't unite dynasties or strengthen alliances. All I have is this guitar and a song I wrote for you." The guard captain stepped forward. "You dare interrupt the royal ceremony, seize him." But Prince Christopher held up a hand. He looked at Finn with something like curiosity. "Let him speak." Finn pulled out his guitar. His hands were shaking, but he forced them steady. "Princess Melody, I know I have no right to be here. I know you're about to marry someone else, someone much more suitable than me. But my father died 3 days ago, and before he did, he told me not to let pride steal what could be the best thing in my life. So I'm here to tell you this." He began to play. The song was simple, just 3 chords and a melody. But it was honest, raw, real. It was everything he couldn't say in words, all the mornings by the river, all the laughter and learning, all the moments when he'd seen past her title to the real person underneath. It was a song about a girl who taught him that nobility isn't about crowns, it's about character. It was a song about falling in love with someone's soul. And when he sang the words, they weren't fancy or poetic. They were just true. "I loved you in the morning by the river, when you didn't have a crown upon your head. You showed me who you were behind the glitter. And I loved the girl I met, and not the legend spread. You said you felt like you were drowning in a world of perfect sound. But I heard your real voice when the guards weren't around. And if I never see you after tonight, at least you'll know your heart shone bright in the simple morning light." The ballroom was silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Finn's last note hung in the air, then faded away. He lowered his guitar and looked at Melody one final time. "That's all I came to say. I'm leaving Nashville tonight. I just wanted you to know. It was real. For me, it was all real. And if you ever wonder if anyone sees the real you behind all this," he gestured at the golden dress, the diamonds, the palace. "I do. I see you, Mel, and I think you're beautiful." He turned to go, expecting to be arrested, expecting to be thrown out. But before he could take a step, a voice stopped him. "Wait." It was Melody. She stood from her throne, her golden dress rustling. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup, and she didn't care at all. "Father," she said, her voice shaking but strong, "I can't do this. I can't marry Christopher. I don't love him. I love." She looked at Finn. "I love a fisherman's son who taught me to read a river, who taught me what honesty sounds like, who saw past my crown to who I really am." The Music King stood, his face darkening. "Melody, you will sit down this instant." "No," such a simple word, but it rang through the hall like a bell. "No, father, I've been sitting down my whole life. I've been smiling and performing and doing everything you asked me to do, but I can't do this. I won't." "You would throw away everything, for him." The king gestured at Finn dismissively. "I would throw away everything for myself," Melody said. "For the chance to be who I actually am, not who you need me to be. And yes, for him. Because he's the only person who's ever loved me, not Princess Melody, not the Music King's daughter, but just me." Prince Christopher stood as well. To everyone's surprise, he was smiling. "Your Majesty," he said to the Music King, "if I may speak." The king waved his hand impatiently. "What?" "I've been engaged to your daughter for 3 months, and in that time she's never once looked at me the way she's looking at that young man right now. I think," he said gently, "we both know this marriage was a mistake, a political arrangement that neither of us wanted. I have no desire to marry someone who loves another, and frankly, I admire her courage." He bowed to Melody. "Your Highness, you have my blessing, for what it's worth." The Music King looked between his daughter, the prince, and Finn. The entire court was watching, waiting. This was the moment that would define his legacy. Would he be remembered as the king who chose power over love, or as a father who chose his daughter's happiness? For a long moment nobody moved. Then slowly the king descended from his throne. He walked across the ballroom floor until he stood in front of Finn. Up close, Finn could see the resemblance. Melody had her father's eyes, that same shade of blue. "You fish the Cumberland?" the king asked quietly. "Yes, sir," Finn replied. "Every morning since I was 6 years old." "And your father, what did he do?" "He was a fisherman, too. He died 3 days ago." Something shifted in the king's face. "I knew a fisherman once, long time ago before I was king. He taught me to cast a net, told me the river was like music, you had to feel it, not just hear it. Best teacher I ever had." He was quiet for a moment. "What was your father's name?" William Rivers." The king's eyes widened. "Will Rivers, old Will was your father." "You knew him?" "Knew him? He saved my life when I was 15. I fell into the river during a storm, would have drowned if he hadn't pulled me out." The king shook his head in wonder. "I never forgot that. Never forgot what he told me that day, that the truest music comes from the truest heart." He looked at Finn closely. "You have his eyes, and his courage, apparently, walking into a royal ball and declaring your love for a princess." "I'm sorry, your Majesty. I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize for loving my daughter," the king interrupted. "That's the one thing in this whole mess I can't fault you for." He turned to look at Melody and his voice softened. "She gets that from her mother, you know, that fire, that need to be real. I tried to crush it out of her, same way it was crushed out of me. Thought I was protecting her, teaching her to survive." He looked back at Finn. "But maybe survival isn't enough." "Father," Melody's voice was small, hopeful. The king took a deep breath. "I've made a lot of mistakes, forgot who I was before I was king, forgot why I fell in love with music in the first place, forgot," his voice cracked slightly, "forgot what it sounds like when someone sings from their heart." He looked at his daughter with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Melody. I'm sorry I tried to make you into something you're not. I'm sorry I didn't listen." He turned to address the court. "The engagement is dissolved. There will be no marriage between Nashville and Memphis." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Melody took a step forward. "Father, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I've been a king for so long I forgot how to be a father, but I'm going to try to remember." He looked at Finn. "Young man, I'm not giving you my daughter's hand. That's not mine to give. It's hers. But if she chooses you, and it appears she has, then you have my blessing." Finn felt like he was in a dream. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. But then Melody was running toward him, her golden dress streaming behind her, and she threw herself into his arms. They met in the center of the ballroom floor, surrounded by confused nobles and shocked courtiers, and none of it mattered. Nothing mattered except her arms around his neck, her tears on his shoulder, her voice whispering in his ear. I love you, I'm so sorry. I should have told you from the beginning I love you. Finn held her close, his own tears falling into her hair. I love you too, I never stopped. And in that moment, in a ballroom full of people, they found the same peace they'd found on a quiet dock at dawn. The peace of being completely, honestly themselves. The wedding was not what anyone expected. There was no grand cathedral ceremony, no hundreds of guests, no state delegation. Instead, one misty morning in early November, as the sun rose over the Cumberland River, a small group gathered on an old fishing dock. The king was there, wearing simple clothes for the first time in 20 years. Prince Christopher came, having become an unexpected friend. A few fishermen who'd known Finn's father showed up to pay their respects, and a priest who'd known Melody since she was a child, who'd seen her grow up in that golden cage, who smiled through his tears as he married them. Melody wore a simple white dress. Finn wore his father's best shirt. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about honesty and trust and always keeping a space for the other to be real. When the priest pronounced them married, they kissed as the morning birds sang and the river flowed, and somewhere in the mist, the world felt right again. Afterward, the king pulled Finn aside. I'm going to give you something, he said, handing Finn a small wooden box. Inside was an old, tarnished key. This was your father's, the deed to a piece of land by the river, 10 acres he won in a card game years ago but never told anyone about. He made me promise to give it to you when the time was right. I think that time is now. Finn stared at the key, overwhelmed. I don't understand, my father never. Your father was a proud man. He didn't want charity, but he wanted you to have choices he never had. Build something there, Finn, for you and my daughter, for the life you're going to create together. That's exactly what they did. Over the next year, Finn and Melody built a small house on that land by the river. Not a palace, but a home, with wide windows that overlooked the water, a front porch perfect for playing guitar on summer evenings, and a dock where they could fish at dawn. Melody left behind her golden dresses and diamond tiaras, trading them for simple clothes and bare feet. She had never been happier. But they didn't abandon the city. Nashville was still their home, and they had something to give it. Together, they opened a music school by the river, a place where anyone could come to learn, regardless of whether they could pay. Rich or poor, talented or tone-deaf, everyone was welcome. Finn taught guitar and songwriting, focusing on finding your authentic voice. Melody taught singing and performance, but not the polished, perfect kind she'd been raised on, the real kind, the kind that came from the soul. The school grew slowly at first, but word spread. Young people came from all over Tennessee to learn from the princess who'd given up her crown and the fisherman who'd won her heart. They learned more than music at that school. They learned that authenticity was more valuable than perfection, that courage meant being yourself even when the world wanted you to be something else, that love was worth fighting for. The music king, true to his word, began to change too. He started visiting the school, sitting in on lessons, even picking up a guitar again after 30 years. One evening, Finn found him on the dock, staring out at the water. I used to fish here, the king said quietly. Before everything, before I forgot who I was. It's not too late to remember, Finn replied, handing him a fishing rod. And so, in the twilight of his reign, the music king learned to fish again. He and Finn would spend mornings on the water, talking about everything and nothing, and slowly, the old man's laughter returned. He began to smile more, to listen more, to remember what it felt like to be human instead of just a crown. 3 years after that fateful ball, Melody gave birth to a daughter. They named her River, after the water that had brought her parents together. The little girl had her mother's golden hair and her father's kind eyes, and from her very first breath, she seemed to carry music in her soul. River grew up on the bank of the Cumberland, learning to fish before she could read, learning to sing before she could talk properly. She was never a princess in the traditional sense. No one called her Your Highness or expected her to curtsy. But she was royalty in the ways that mattered. She was kind. She was honest. She was brave enough to be exactly who she was. The Music King, now simply called Grandfather, or sometimes Papa Will after Finn's father, spent his final years teaching River everything he'd forgotten and then remembered. He taught her that kingdoms come and go, but character lasts forever. He taught her that the truest crown is the one you can't see. It's made of integrity, compassion, and courage. On the morning the Music King died, 10 years after that wedding on the dock, he passed peacefully in his sleep with Melody holding one hand and Finn holding the other. His last words were sung, a line from an old river song. The water flows on, and so do we. They buried him not in the grand royal mausoleum, but in the small cemetery overlooking the Cumberland, right next to Will Rivers. Two fishermen in the end. Two friends. Two men who'd learned that the greatest treasures aren't found in palaces, but in honest work, simple love, and the courage to be real. Years passed. The school by the river became famous throughout Tennessee and beyond. Students who learned there went on to become musicians, teachers, activists, leaders, not because they'd learned to be perfect, but because they'd learned to be authentic. The Rivers School, as it came to be known, started a movement. Other schools opened across the country, all built on the same principle: teach people to find their voice, not to copy someone else's. Melody and Finn grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming weathered. But their love never aged. Every morning they still woke before dawn and walked down to the dock. Sometimes they'd fish. Sometimes they'd just sit and watch the sun rise. And sometimes Finn would play his guitar and Melody would sing, and their voices would carry across the water just like they had on that first morning so many years ago. River grew into a remarkable woman. She never wanted to be a princess or a queen. Instead, she became a teacher at her parents' school, carrying on their legacy. She married a carpenter's son, much to everyone's delight, and had 3 children of her own, all of whom learned to fish, to sing, and to be unapologetically themselves. On Finn and Melody's 50th wedding anniversary, the entire city of Nashville gathered by the Cumberland River for a celebration. There were no grand ballrooms or formal ceremonies. Instead, there was a simple gathering on the riverbank, musicians playing, children running, old friends sharing stories. The new Music King, a distant cousin who'd inherited the throne, stood and raised a glass. 50 years ago, he said, a fisherman's son walked into a royal ball and changed everything. He reminded us that love matters more than lineage, that character matters more than crowns, that being real matters more than being perfect. Today, we honor not just their love, but the revolution they started, a revolution of authenticity in a world that often values appearance over truth. Everyone cheered, but Finn and Melody, sitting on their old dock with their feet dangling in the water, barely noticed. They were too busy looking at each other, still seeing what they'd seen on that first morning. Two souls who recognized each other, who chose each other, who'd built a life on the foundation of honest love. "Do you ever regret it?" Finn asked quietly. "Giving up the palace, the crown, all of it?" Melody laughed, the same laugh he'd fallen in love with decades ago. "Regret it? Finn, I didn't give anything up. I gained everything. A real life, a real love, the freedom to be myself." She squeezed his hand. "You saved me, you know, that morning on the dock when you just invited me to sit and fish. You saved my life." "No," Finn said, pulling her close. "We saved each other." As the sun set over the Cumberland River that evening, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, 2 old people sat on a dock and watched their great-grandchildren playing in the shallows. The river flowed on, as it always had, as it always would. And in its current, in its endless song, was the story of a fisherman's son and a princess who'd learned that the greatest adventure isn't found in kingdoms or conquests. It's found in the courage to love honestly, to live authentically, and to build something real in a world that often settles for illusion. The river still flows through Nashville, and if you go down to the water early in the morning when the mist rises like ghosts and the city is still sleeping, you might hear it, the sound of a guitar, the melody of a voice, and the echo of a love story that changed everything. Because some stories don't end. They just flow on like the river, teaching each generation the same eternal truth, that the richest life isn't the one with the most gold, but the one with the most love. That the highest throne isn't in a palace, but in the heart of someone who sees you, really sees you, and loves what they find. Finn and Melody lived to be very old, their love story becoming legend in Nashville. And when they finally passed, within hours of each other as if neither could bear to be without the other, they were buried on a hill overlooking the Cumberland River, under a simple stone that read, "Here lie two souls who chose love over crowns, truth over tradition, and each other over everything else. The river remembers, the morning remembers. And so do we." And every year on the anniversary of that fateful ball, people gather at the river's school by the water. They fish at dawn, they play music, they tell the story of the princess who became real and the fisherman who taught her how. They teach their children that courage doesn't always look like slaying dragons or conquering kingdoms. Sometimes courage looks like telling the truth. Sometimes it looks like choosing love when everyone says you shouldn't. Sometimes it looks like being yourself in a world that wants you to be someone else. The Cumberland River still flows, Nashville still sings, and somewhere in the midst of every morning, if you listen very carefully, you can still hear them, the fisherman's son and the princess of Nashville, reminding us all that the greatest stories aren't about crowns and castles. They're about two people brave enough to be real with each other. They're about love that flows on, like a river forever. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I love you face blowing a kiss.